Good afternoon and welcome to VetNet, a live session on how to make an educated decision when evaluating and buying a franchise. My name is Elvis Aldich, and this session is brought to you by Institute for Veterans and Military Families, IVMF, here at Syracuse University. IVMF has a portfolio of programs in entrepreneurship and in career transitioning programs that help veterans move to the next level, help them start a business. We also are involved highly in community work and research as well. So if you're looking for more information on IVMF, please visit our ivmf.syracuse.edu website. And today our guest speaker is Stefan Maker from Texas. And I'm going to let Stefan introduce themselves and talk a little more about how to evaluate a franchise before you make a decision to buy it. Stefan?
Okay, Elvis, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Stefan.
Okay, very good. There's a little bit of background noise, but okay, very good. If we can put the presentation up, that would be great. And first of all, thank you to each one of you for what you do for our country in service to the military. My wife and I are deeply appreciative. In the next 45 minutes, my job is to educate you on the proper way to evaluate buying a franchise and ultimately help you assess if franchising is the right thing to do as you exit the military and pursue your next professional step. So with that said, let's look at the table of contents, Elvis, if we can. We can go to the next slide. This will give you an overview. I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about myself and my past corporate and educational background. I'll give you a flavor for some of the past folks that I've helped over the last 5.5 years as a nationally published franchise consultant with FranChoice. We'll define franchising. I want to talk about candidate motivations. I want to talk about the good and the bad of franchising and who it specifically can be for, and equally as important, who it's not for. And one of the things you're going to hear me say is statistically, military veterans outperform non-military veterans when it comes to franchising, and I'll explain why I say that. We're then going to give you a high-level overview of what a franchise disclosure document looks like and focus on some of the key items in that document. We'll talk about the ways to analyze potential income. I'll speak to franchise costs, and then I'm going to define what I consider the 4 quadrants of franchising. You'll hear that there are about 3,000 franchisers out there in the United States, and they can all be defined or allocated into one of 4 quadrants. I'll show you the franchise investigation process that my wife and I used to purchase one of the franchises that I represent. I represent about 100 out of more than 3,000. So my wife and I are living and breathing franchisees, and I'll give you our story there. And then last but not least, I'll talk a little bit about financing and then give you my contact information. You'll learn that my service is free, and I help people all over the world in terms of taking the education-based approach to evaluating buying a franchise. So if we can move to the first slide, that would be great, Elvis. I start first and foremost with my family. That is my daughter in the upper left-hand corner. She is an incoming freshman at the Cleveland Institute of Music and Case Western. She will double major in cello performance and pre-med at Case Western. She spent the last 2 years at one of the most prestigious music boarding schools in the country, Interlochen, and has made the most of her opportunities. So she departs from Texas on August 19th, and my wife and I will be heading up there Labor Day to see the campus. My son in the far right-hand corner is he's 17. In that picture, he's 14, but he's 17, and he is a fisherman. We just got back from Alaska a couple weeks ago, and his objective next summer before entering college is to spend the summer in Alaska as a fishing guide. Below in the middle is my wife, Christy. My wife has just been promoted to Director of Counseling Services for KDISD. She has ultimate responsibility for over 80,000 students and all of the counselors and registrars in the school district. Additionally, my wife, Christy, handles the social media marketing of our franchise, and I handle the operations and customer support. My educational background is undergraduate at the University of Texas in Austin, BBA, Finance Management, MBA, the University of Southern California in 1996, Entrepreneurial Ventures and Marketing. And I'm proud to say that I professionally practice what I went to school for in terms of entrepreneurial ventures. I'm not only an entrepreneur as a franchise consultant, but one as a franchisee. My corporate career has been a blessed one. I've spent the first 6 years in the oil and gas industry with ExxonMobil, the industry leader. Worked various stages of progressive level of franchise responsibility and company operated responsibility. From there, I transitioned into the restaurant industry, where I worked for 3 industry leaders, one with the biggest casual dining company on the planet, at which time I oversaw global financial reporting and strategic planning for over 140 franchise restaurants in 40 some odd countries. Spent some time running a bunch of restaurants, and then also on the franchise sales stint. So the restaurant industry, I know it well, and I'm here to say it's not for everybody. But for those people who have passion and who know how to run a restaurant, it can be a fun thing. The last 5.5 years, I have been a nationally published franchise consultant with an organization called FranChoice, hands down the premier group of franchise consultants in this country. I've consistently been one of the top performers, and I am nationally published. I work with people by providing a free service, both locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. And my job is to take people through a step-by-step process that helps them evaluate whether or not a specific franchise is the right fit for them. Last but not least, my wife and I put our money where our mouth is. So one of the 100 franchises that I represent, we bought. We opened December 2015. We are in the salon suite space. If someone would have told me 3 years ago I was going to be in the salon suite space, I would have said, "You're crazy. I don't even know what that is." But the business has been an outstanding investment for us. We operate in College Station, Texas, which is about 80 minutes away. And last year, we were one of 3 franchisees in a 116 franchisee system that received multiple awards at the annual conference. And I'm proud to say that we are one of the top performers in that system. Okay, that's a bit of my overview. Let's go to the next slide, Elvis, and let's take a little bit of a look at people in the past that have come to me that have helped. And if you just look at that slide, what you're going to see is it's just a range of people, ranging from an immigration visa deal, which I've done multiple of these, to a husband and wife from Coca-Cola that were directors in Venezuela, to senior vice presidents or COOs, or to somebody who's owned 30 Hardys before. They all come to me with different shapes and walks in life. Each one of them had their different motivations. And again, this is just a small sampling of people that I've helped in the past. I show this to you to get a flavor for different people have different motivations and different backgrounds. And the key is to leverage the background and the transferable skill set to a franchise that's a direct fit to the model, which we'll talk about in a bit. Okay, Elvis, let's go to the next slide and let's talk a little bit about what franchising is. A couple of years ago, the University of Texas asked me to fly out to Mexico City to meet with Mexico MBA's well-capitalized Mexican national citizens. And this is a slide from the presentation. And when I showed this slide, I forget the particular model that this is from Latin America, but some of the folks knew her. And at the core, franchising is a model for doing business. You pay a franchise fee up front one time to follow a proven model. Another thing that a franchise is my wife's a good cook, and this is a recipe. And again, it's a recipe for potential success. And I highlight potential because nobody can guarantee your success. Nobody can guarantee a certain level of financial performance. It is ultimately up to the candidate in making an education-based decision, assessing fit, and then determining if that franchisor's model is in congruence with the candidate's model. And the last thing that I share with you is that by no means, not all franchisors are created equally. They're not. In this, you'll learn different ways to see that and to learn that. A few of the reasons why we bought what we bought was the franchise we bought. Every principal in the company is a multi-unit franchisee. I value that. They put their money where their mouth is. Secondly, with over 350 units open, there's never been a failure. I submit to you, a franchise that has 350 units open in absence of a failure or in absence of litigation, they're doing something right. So our takeaway as we went through the investigation was, if we simply follow the model, if we simply follow the recipe, we will maximize our probability of success. And I will tell you, that's been a good move for Christy and I. All right, let's look at the next slide. You know, when you look at it, there's two key statistics that I cite. And I taught a seminar 2 days ago here in Houston at the Small Business Development Center. And one of the members or one of the attendees in the audience knew the Stanley Danko book, The Millionaire Next Door. One of the key things that book highlights is that only 18% of households in the United States are headed by self-employed people. Yet, that 18% of self-employed people are 4 times more likely to be millionaires. That's a statistically significant stat. The second stat comes from the International Franchise Association. And admittedly, this is a study that was multiple years that is outdated. It was done in the early to mid 90s, I believe, and it was a rolling study to where the IFA evaluated hundreds of non-franchise owners compared to franchise business owners. And one of the key statistics that they learned was that after, I believe it was 5 years of being open, only 10% of non-franchise business owners were still open, i.e. 90% failed, compared to 90% of franchise business owners still open over the same time period. That is statistically significant. And it goes back to the fact that in maximizing the probability of success, a proven business model and a proven recipe can be a very good thing. Out of the next breath, the study needs to be updated, admittedly, but it's statistically significant in terms of the finding. Let's look at the next slide, and let's talk about some of the motivations. One of the things that I love in what I do for a living as a franchise consultant with FranChoice is literally on a daily basis, I'm not sure who I'm going to talk to. The only given is somebody's going to get connected to me through different referral sources. So when somebody connects with me, the first question that I ask them is, what is your primary motivation in terms of finding a great franchise? And these are 5 of the most popular reasons that I find. You know, here in Texas, the price of oil is under $50. And when the price of oil is under $50, downsizing happens in the oil and gas industry. And unfortunately, a lot of times people don't see it. So one of the primary reasons is people get downsized. They're at a 40, 50-year-old age. They've made a nice 6-digit income. Now they're downsized in an industry that's not hiring. You know, what do? Do they leverage their transferable skill set in a franchise? Another reason, and a primary motivation for Christy and I, was to diversify. Now today, I think yesterday, the stock market hit an all-time high. The only given is, in my professional opinion, is what comes up will come down. And one of the reasons why we diversified into the Salon Suite franchise that we bought was to have more ability to potentially control the results. When the stock market crashes or when the bond market crashes, there's absolutely nothing we can do for it. I took a call from my financial advisor 2 days ago who let me know that 2 of my stocks in one day went down 10%. Well, I didn't know about it. And the bottom line is there's nothing I can do about it. Within the business that we bought, we know that if we followed the model and if we treated our people respectfully and overpromised and over-delivered, we would maximize the probability of doing well. So for us, we diversified. Another reason I hear often is change. Hey, I've been doing that. I did a consultation yesterday with a gentleman who's been in banking for 41 years. He is tired of it. He and his wife are ready for a change, and he's planning for his next professional step. Another driver of why Christy and I did what we did was legacy. One day, 10 years from now, our dream is to have, maybe 4 or 5 of these and be able one day to hand these to our children and say, this is your business now. What do you want to do with it? You can run it, you can sell it. That will be their call. Another big motivation that I've seen is I help on the E2 immigration visa side, the L1 visa, the EB5 immigration visa. There's about 80 countries that we have reciprocal treaty arrangements through the United States with on an E2. And somebody that's not a U.S. citizen can come in and with a slight investment over 100 grand and hiring a few employees out of the gate can maximize the potential for visa approval. So people come to me with all different types of motivations. And that's a key for me in helping understand why it is they're speaking and what they're trying to accomplish at that stage in life. Let's go to the next slide. This is a handful of advantages of owning a franchise. Now, and I've picked out half a dozen. Proven systems can equal fewer mistakes. Again, I shared the statistic with you that what we bought, 350 open stores, has never had a failure. I submit to you that that's not luck. I submit to you that is strong franchisees following a proven business model. Now, it's not to say that we don't make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. The key is to learn from them. But the proven system helps to maximize making less mistakes. The business partnership and peer group. We joined our business in the salon suite space because of the corporate leadership. Additionally, one of the wonderful side effects is that our franchisee peer group are some of the neatest people I've ever had the privilege of working with in our life. As a franchise consultant with franchise, I'll tell you that I adore my peers. They are some of the sharpest people I've ever met in my life in franchising. Tax ramifications. Just because you're self-employed and as long as you generate a minimum amount of income, you have the ability to do a $54,000 SEP, self-employment plan, every year. Several years ago, I had the ability to buy a 3-ton vehicle, and I was able to write $25,000 off of it in year 1 simply because it was over 3 tons and met a tax code credit. Asset creation. We are doing this as a partial reason for legacy and to scale a multi-unit and create an asset. National brand recognition and buying power. We have a long-term lease in our business with McDonald's. Can McDonald's buy hamburger cheaper than the independent? When McDonald's puts a sign up, do they have national brand recognition? Of course they do. The business that we got into was a pioneer 5 years ago, and today with over 350 stores open, it dominates the space. We have strong national brand recognition, and they're able to aggregate buying power with our cabinets, etc. Real estate and marketing expertise. One of the things that we learned in validation when we had the opportunity to connect with other franchisees were the specifics of the real estate and marketing pieces. And we learned that if we had corporate help guide us in terms of site selection, And then if we got the lease done, that if we followed the marketing checklist, i.e. probably the most important piece of paper that we got out of training, out of the standard operations manual, was if we followed that marketing checklist, that when we open the doors, we would have the chance to maximize success. These are just a handful of advantages of franchise ownership, but some very good ones. Now, Elvis, let's look on the other side of the coin. Let's talk about disadvantages. And years ago, I was quoted in one of the national newspapers, something to this effect: if you're not somebody who likes to play nicely in the sandbox, franchising is not for you. What do I mean by that? Well, we have signed a franchise agreement. So if we do not uphold to the standards in the item 9 in the FDD, the franchisee obligations, we can ultimately be non-renewed, or worse yet, even terminated. So we signed up knowing we had certain commitments that we had to make, and we follow the rules. We follow it step by step. And when we come up with a best practice, we share that with the system. Now, with that said, if you're somebody that likes to color out of the lines, or that is more of a, I'm not going to follow procedure and protocol, I'm here to tell you this might not be for you. The other thing that I've shared, and you can research this on your own, but statistically, military veterans outperform. Why? One of the key reasons you'll learn is that military vets know how to follow standard operating procedure. That's all about a franchise, following protocol. Additional things that you hear, well, I have to pay a franchise fee. Well, yes, you do. In the item 5, it's stipulated for a single or multi-unit or territory. It's payable when the agreement is executed. I have to pay royalties. Well, yes, you do. In the item 6, there will be the royalty percentage and the format in which that is paid. So this is just a part of a cost of doing business in buying a franchise. And then you're going to see the checklist again. They are not all created equally. And there are ways that you can determine this in the franchise disclosure document, based on litigation, based on franchisees exiting the system, and based on validation. When you have the chance to talk to franchisees, and one of the questions you ask them is, are you happy with your decision? Does the franchisor support you? Let's go to the next slide. Franchise disclosure document. A couple key things here. First of all, annually published by the FTC. So what is it? Every year, a franchisor has to publish their franchise disclosure document. There are a few things about this, and first and foremost, in terms of the investigation, it is certainly one of the most important pieces of the puzzle that you're going to get. You're going to see that when you get one, that there are 23 items. They're consistent. They are uniform. If you got 2,000 FDDs and you line the table of contents up, you would see they're all the same. So if you can read one, you can read any of them. The language is consistent. The language is uniform. It is written protective in terms of the language for the franchisor. Now let's take a look, and let's look at a few of the key items. And again, there are 23, but I specifically picked out, Elvis, if we can go to the next slide, a few of the key ones. So if you want to understand the expense side of the business, items 5, 6, and 7. Item 5, the initial fee paid to the franchisor. This is payable up front when you execute your agreement. Oftentimes, franchisors will incent multi-unit behavior by having the first fee at A and the second, third incrementally ones maybe at a reduction. That's one of the incentives for potentially for multi-unit behavior, but that is also completely up to the franchisor. Other fees, things such as royalties. In our franchise, we pay a certain percentage of our gross income due by the 10th of each month. We simply go to the internet, I upload my gross fees, it automatically calculates the royalty in the National Advertising Fund. It's pulled from our bank account the same day of the month. The estimated initial investment. These are itemized cost in tabular formats, the same way item 6 is, which will show the low to high range. So in our business that we bought, the low to high range was nearly a variance of $700,000 back in 2013. Well, I don't know about you guys, but that's a big, big difference. So one of the things that we had to understand in our investigation was what is the driver of that variance? And what we learned was ultimately it was driven by the square footage of the building. The item 9, franchisee obligations. What do we have to do to stay in good contractual standing to have our franchise agreement renewed when it expires? In our case, it expires in 10 years. We, on good faith, did a 15-year lease with 2 5-year renewal options. So our full expectations are to be able to renew at 10 years and to, again, be upstanding superstar franchisees, which as today we are. And I'm proud to say that. The 11, the franchisor assistance. You're going to pay a fee to the franchisor. This is what you're paying it for. What do they do for marketing, for site assistance, for grand openings, for training? This is where all of that is spelled out in the item 11. In terms of territory, the item 12, how is territory defined? Is it contiguous? Is it by zip code? Is it exclusive? This is how all of that is handled. The obligation to participate in the item 15. Is this a hands-on, full-time business that you are required to be daily involved in? Is it a semi-absent, part-time manager-run model? Typically lends itself more toward a retail brick-and-mortar business. Does it have the potential to even be an absentee business? This is where your obligation to participate is stipulated. The item 19, does the franchisor make a financial performance representation? If they do, great. Might help you make certain financial assumptions a bit easier. Again, they can't guarantee your performance. You will see a system and a range of performances. But if they do make performance representations, in our case, we were able to see cost per square foot based on company units. We were able to see market rents based on individual sites. So those pieces of the puzzle kind of helped us in better understanding key pieces of the business. And then furthermore, and more importantly, we were able to validate certain things when we were able to speak to the franchisees that we spoke with. Item 20, outlets and franchisee information. How many people in the year the franchise document was produced are in the system? And one of the tables will have every franchisee in the system that is currently an active franchisee. You can pick up the phone and call them. You can talk to whoever you want to. In our particular case, we spoke with 4 people directly, and I'll share what we learned when we get to a football field analogy. So lots and lots of good information here. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of analyzing income, one of the ways that you can do that is, whether or not the franchisor makes a financial performance representation in the item 19, and then you can use that as part of your analysis. In the item 5, 6, and 7, you know what the franchise fee is in the item 5, the ongoing fees in the item 6, and in the item 7, that's the cost range, the low to high. You want to validate with franchisees. And you're going to hear me say, and again, this is something that doesn't take place until you get to a certain stage in the investigation process. And we'll use the football field in a minute to see that. Then some of the franchisors will send out spreadsheets and models. And in our particular case, we used the model and we were able to make conservative, realistic, and aggressive projections. And it kind of gave us a feeling for, well, what happens if we knock it out of the park versus what happens if we don't? And ultimately, you have to be at peace with all of those scenarios as part of your educated buying decision. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of analyzing potential income, just some sample questions that you can potentially ask franchisees. And the stipulation that I make is that some franchisees will know this to the decimal point. In our particular case, if someone is approved into validation by the franchisor, and if somebody wants to ask me how long it took me to break even, my wife and I to break even, I can tell them because I'm a franchisee within that system. Not until they're approved into validation. If somebody wants to know net sales or net income, I know my return on assets, I know my return on investments, I know my capitalization, I know the amount of working capital it took me to get open to the decimal point. I know my numbers. Understand that not everybody's going to know the numbers to that level, and not everybody's going to be as comfortable sharing this with you. But again, these are potential questions you can ask, certainly amongst others, to help you get to making certain financial assumptions. Again, that no franchisor can guarantee you, and that no franchisee can guarantee the success. It's all about making educated-based decisions and assumptions. Elvis, let's go to the next slide, please. Franchise cost. Well, now you know that there's a franchise fee payable in the item 5 when you execute your agreements. We know that there's ongoing fees found in the item 6. Highly important, working capital. So after you open the doors, do you need 3, 6, 9 months, a year? How much working capital do you need to sustain your lifestyle, to sustain your mortgage, your car payment, your children? Very, very important. Last but not least, franchisors that I represent will each have a minimum net worth and liquidity number. Some of them will substantiate that. Some of them will not. The bottom line is a franchisor wants to bring you in, that you're an outstanding fit to their business model, and that you have the capitalization, that you meet the minimum net worth and you exceed the net worth and liquidity requirements to maximize probability of success. Let's look at the next slide, please. 4 quadrants of franchising. Statistically, there are approximately 3,000 franchises. Let's go with that number. And let's make an assumption, which is a general assumption, that maybe they're slotted evenly into these 4 quadrants. So 2 of them are retail, i.e. brick and mortar, as differentiated between simple and complex, where the investment is less than or greater than $250K. The other 2 are service-based, where you're primarily targeting consumer, i.e. in their home or residence, and are a business-to-business play. So let's look at the next slide and let's kind of see some differences in terms of what that might look like. On the simple retail, the upper left-hand corner, you see the hair care industry. We're in the salon suite space, okay, which ultimately we have 22 stylists that lease from us and they pay us a weekly rent. Ultimately, their industry is hair care. Now, for us, we're landlords. We're in the commercial real estate business. But hair care is a needs-based, recession-proof business. It is a business that will not be displaced by the internet. The only way somebody's not going to get their hair taken care of is if they go bald. That was another reason we got into it. Certain food concepts you can get into for under $250. Certainly others are going to cost substantially more than $250. It just depends on the square footage and the model. Fitness. Wow, boutique fitness, a huge evolution in the industry, putting out and displacing big box traditional fitness concepts, where many of these you can get into under $250. If you look at the greater than $250 side, that's a picture of our French Bulldog Harold. Pet care, where I live, 74% of the households have a pet. When people go on vacation, they need a place to board their animals. You look at automotive repair. You talk about a needs-based, recession-resistant business. Somebody's car breaks down, they need to have it fixed. Medical weight loss. The medical obesity rate in the United States is unreal, and unfortunately, it's getting worse literally on a daily basis. Medical obesity is the fastest growing problem in the country with respect to healthcare. If we look at the bottom left-hand corner, business to consumer, things such as pests, the non-medical home health care, where 10,000 people turn 65 a day. And the last statistic that I saw is less than 1% of that industry is currently represented. It's a huge business, but it's a business that's not for everybody. Financial planning is another example. If you look on the business to business side, things like mold and water damage, here in Houston, which has been unreal. I think parts of Houston out near where I live have been flooded twice in the last 15 months. It creates huge opportunities for franchisors in that business. Power washing, commercial cleaning, residential cleaning. So when somebody comes to me, one of the things I'm looking for is what they've done in their career and what is that transferable skill set. And ultimately, do they have interest in one of these specific quadrants? And we dive into that much more deeper on a consultation, which I explained. Out of 3,000 franchisers, there's about 100 different industries represented. This is just a handful of 12. Let's go to the next slide, Elvis. The investigation process. You know, again, when somebody talks to me, why are we talking? What's the primary motivation? With the wonderful people on this webinar, God bless you. Many of you will have fulfilled your military commitment. You will be honorably discharged vets. You're looking for that next professional chapter. We know that vets perform statistically well in franchising. So, you know, is your motivation to transition from the military into an entrepreneurial route through a proven franchise? When we talk about characteristics, this is a whole bunch of different things. You know, what is the targeted geography? What is the investment? Do you want a single or a multi-unit play? What's your philosophy on employees? Do you want a lot? Do you want more? Do you want an easy, a hard operation? If you do have employees, do you want 1099 and or W-2 contractors? You know, what's your philosophy on sales? Do you want a cold call, or do you prefer a warm lead? Do you prefer a pioneer franchise that might have been in business for years, but has only started franchising, which is what we got into several years ago? Or do you want a more mature franchise? There's all different types of things to consider. You know, do you want a needs-based business, or do you want more of a wants-based business? There are a lot of things to filter through. And again, you know, what's your vision 5-10 years from now? Are you comfortable with one unit, or are you an empire builder? Do you want maybe 5 or 10? All this factors into the investigation. Let's look at the next slide. Now, anybody here that's ever been to Austin, Texas, that is a Longhorn, that is a Texas Longhorn, which, by the way, I said that I started, I did my undergrad at Texas. I've also been a professor for the University of Texas in the business school, for the A&M system, and for the University of Houston. So one of the ways that I like to give back to the community is by teaching. And one of the ways that I give back to people that are interested in franchising is by being able to do these types of seminars. So what happens is when I do a candidate's model, and I check territory for that candidate through the franchisers that I represent, what happens is when those territory checks come back as available, then I know the potential fits to the candidate. And I'm going to kick the ball off to that candidate, and that candidate's going to get the football on the introductory call. So when I introduce the candidate, I'm going to introduce their model. We're going to go over all the key characteristics. And then I'm going to introduce that franchisor's business model in direct relationship to the candidate's model. The far majority of time, the candidate would not have thought of the target franchise. I would not have known of the salon suite space, but when we looked at our model in direct relationship to what we got into, it was a dream fit. Now, the one thing I didn't say is earlier on, I showed a picture of my wife, Christy. I met Christy through eHarmony, a Christian-based website. My wife and I are both senior elders at our church. We believe heavily in giving back. And the ironic thing about how Christy and I met through eHarmony is directly parallel to what I do. It's simply through matching principles. It was matching us with key characteristics we wanted to look for in a soulmate. I match the candidate's model with that in a franchisor's business model in direct alignment as a way to maximize probability of success. So what happens is when I introduce the candidate, I then connect the candidate to the franchise sales head person. They get the model, they get the completed questionnaire. So what happens is the candidate has a good baseline for the franchisor's business model, and now the franchisor has a good feeling for the candidate. That starts marching toward the 50-yard line, which includes a sequence of events at one point that will include the FDD being disseminated, the introductory call, a unit economics, a marketing and operations overview. So by the time somebody gets to the 50-yard line, they should start visualizing themselves in the concept. If they can't, then it's probably not going to be the right fit. When they can and when they do is that when at that point now they've got a good baseline, so they get into validation. And validation is when the franchisor lets the candidate validate with existing franchisees. Different franchisees will have a different culture of validation. So as an example, in our case, once we had gotten the baseline and the understanding of the franchisor, our franchisor sent an email to all the franchisees saying, hey, this is Stephen and Christy. They're in College Station. They're looking at buying the franchise. If they reach out to you, please take a few minutes out of your day. In our particular case, we reached out to 4 of the franchisees. And what we were looking for was answers to 6 questions that were primarily quantifiable. And we were looking for a range of performance. We were able to talk to a superstar, and we were able to talk to a non-superstar. And the biggest thing that we learned was the superstar, the day that they took possession of the building and started the build out, started hammering the marketing checklist. The person that was not a superstar did not. They sat back. They waited for the doors to open under the assumption they would come. So our learning was if we hammer the marketing effort once a build out starts, we can maximize probability of success. We can't be guaranteed, but if we follow the recipe, if we follow the model, we'll maximize the chance at a strong launch, which is exactly what we did. Now, as you're going into validation, at some point when both parties are seeing mutual fit is when a discovery day invitation would happen. That's when you fly to the corporate headquarters. At this time, you need to have your funding strategy in place. You need to have, if you have a review done, we need to have a review done because you want to make sure that you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's. When you go to the discovery day, you might have the chance to not only meet the executives and the team, but you might have the chance to interact with the franchise you know, if it's a franchisee or corporate-owned unit, go see it, go talk to the people, find out their satisfaction levels. Now, at the end of the discovery day, in our case, it was on a Friday afternoon. And what happened was our franchisor on Monday set us up with a decision call. And it was simply this: congratulations, you have been unanimously approved. Are you in or are you out? Our answer was we're in. Send the franchise agreements. They were sent the next day. Signing call took place. At that time, those were paper agreements. Now there's an evolution more toward DocuSign, which is easier. But the bottom line is we executed our agreements. We sent them back with the funds. And at that time, the franchisor was able to execute and countersign. Hence, we became the newest franchisee in the system. Now, to get to that buying decision is all about this football field analogy. It's about from the introduction all the way to the decision to execute and fund. There's a lot of work that has to go into this. In our case, I think it took us nearly 2 months. You know, I have candidates that have done deals in a month, and I've had candidates that have done deals that's taken quite a bit longer. All that matters is that the candidate is making the educated based decision. And one thing that I did not say, which I should have, is many of the franchisors that I represent will have discounts on franchise fees for honorably discharged military veterans. That's a great incentive for military vets. So I want to look at the next slide. Let's talk about what happens before the introduction. So to get to an introduction, a questionnaire has to be sent out, the franchise questionnaire. Now, I get referred through people through all different types of sources. On Tuesday, I had 8 people in my seminar that took 2.5 hours. And that evening, one of the 8 called. I sent them my introductory email, and I sent them the franchise questionnaire, which has taken them nearly 30 minutes to complete. In our case, it took us 22 minutes. That questionnaire begins to touch on the key characteristics that the candidate deals most appealing in an opportunity. That leads to the next step, the most important step, the 45-minute phone or in-person consultation if they happen to live in Houston, or Skype consultation if they prefer. Internationally, I do a lot of Skype. 45 minutes consultation is where I'm asking you questions that you probably haven't thought of, and the output of that is the next business day me writing your model. I email it to you. I ask you to validate the accuracy of the model. If I'm missing something, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Let me know. The typical response that I get is, how did you do that? You've nailed this. That's because I'm going to ask a lot of questions. That leads to the match, which is the introduction. If you go back to the last slide, Elvis, if we can, to the football field, the match is what happens when we get to the goal line on the introduction. That's where the football field starts, okay? So if we forward that again, now if we go to the next slide, then there in the investigation is when you see the various steps. Different franchisors will have different sequence of events, but the bottom line is they're all aimed at making educated-based decisions and at making mutually positive decisions to move forward. Understand that the evaluation of a franchise is a mutual process. You're looking at them the same way they're looking at you to assess fit and probability of maximizing success. Let's look at the next slide. Now, with respect to funding, in 2008, when funding dried up, it was tough. So, about the only way you were going to get funds were if you had them yourself. So now today, the banks might not have learned because funding's a lot looser. And I'm here to tell you that people that have credit ratings, in the high 600s, the low 700s, anybody with a credit rating north of 800 is going to have a lot of opportunity potentially, everything else being equal. So, debt funding mechanisms, things tied with an interest rate, third-party banks, your local bank, SBA lending, asset-backed different types of lending. And then what I talk about is self-funding. And by self-funding, I mean, if you have cash on your own, or one of the biggest instruments that's taken place since the recession is being able to use an IRA. So somebody that's got a 401k that was displaced that converted to an IRA, under an IRA C Corp rollover, you have the ability to use a pot of dollars by incurring a one-time engagement fee, and then you're able to use those dollars tax-free to invest in your business. So in our particular case, the first 1/3 of the capitalization and investment cost, we used a rollover. And after the one-time fee, we were able to use those dollars toward the fees that were incurred in the first incremental third in paying the general contractor on the debt down. I have relationships with 3 national funding partners. Service up there is free as well, and I specifically use one of our 3. So that is another additional service that if somebody needs access to funding based on their personal situation, I'll make the necessary recommendation to help there as well. Let's look at the last slide. And we're right on track. So with that said, should someone want my assistance, what I tell people is, that is my cell phone. Please call me. Let me know what you learned. Let me know a little bit about yourself. Additionally, follow up with an email. But please also call me. My spam is set very high. So if I don't get back to you the same day, it's possible you got spammed. That's my personal website. Feel free to check it out. When you reach out to me, I will email you my introductory email, and I'll set a 15-minute call up with you to talk to you. After that, I will send out the questionnaire, which begins the process that we've now defined. The one thing that I do ask is that don't go to the franchise website directly, because if you register there, you're not ultimately going to get sent to me. You're going to get farmed out. So that's the only thing that I ask. So if you feel that I can help you, and if you feel that the timing in life is right for you to take an education-based approach to look at how to buy a franchise, it will be more than a pleasure to help you. And Elvis, with that said, I think our goal was to have a presentation for about 50 minutes and to use the last 10 minutes in a Q&A format. So I'm going to turn this back to you. And if you want to share the screen, I'll do my best to answer any questions that have surfaced, if any have. And if I don't know the answer, my commitment will be to get back to you with an answer. So with that said, let me let you take it over. Elvis, I can't hear you. Hang on 1 second.
I was on mute, sorry. Yeah, I'm just checking on the YouTube channel to see if anybody has any questions, and I will give it a few seconds to see if anybody has any questions. If not, I would like to just ask you for your best recommendation if any of our veterans or military families are out there looking or interested in buying a franchise. Like, what would your suggestion be they should do? Like, analyze pros, cons, like any kind of like approach that you would recommend in those type of moments. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry. Stefan, you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now? You can hear me? Okay. So to answer your question, the football field analogy shows the sequence of events that need to take place relative to making an educated buying decision. To get to that step, the process that I showed was it starts with an introductory call, getting to know one another. It leads to the questionnaire. It then leads to the consultation, which leads to the candidate's model. This is all about going from 3,000 franchisers down to a certain quadrant, 750, down to 100 or so that I represent, down to 25 if they're evenly distributed, within a matter of about an hour and a half of work, which is the beauty of this. There's no throwing a dart on a board. This is about eHarmony characteristic-based matching, which helps whittle down from 3,000 down to a maximum of 3, compare and contrast, within a matter of a couple hours. So sometimes, and let me give you an example. Sometimes people come to me with a word, and I'll give you an example. Subway. Stephen, I gotta have a Subway. Okay? Now, first of all, I don't represent Subway. And our CEO, Jeff Eldrin, is friends of the founder of Subway, which is a phenomenally successful worldwide brand. So this is the conversation as a generalization that takes place. So you got to have a Subway. Why? Because when I go by it at lunch, there's a line. Great. Why else? Because when I see the brand, people know who it is. Excellent. It's a mature brand. Why else? And you'll get static. I don't know, Steve, I got to have a Subway. Okay, let's spend 60 seconds on that. And I'll ask a series of questions. Have you ever run a restaurant before? The typical answer is no. Have you ever dealt with food cost variances? Have you ever dealt with labor and overtime? A high turnover rate amongst hourly employees? Have you ever dealt with a bathroom that's messy, or an irate customer, or food missing off our truck, or cash shortages, or inventory shortages, or having to cover a shift on a Friday afternoon when the high school shift leader doesn't show up? Now, that took me about 45 seconds to ask those questions, and the typical response is, well, heck no. No, I don't want any of that. The ironic thing is 2 minutes before they told me they wanted Subway. The ironic thing is the last world and they wanted was Subway. But what they told me was they wanted a mature brand that's transactionally driven, that is non 24/7, that's a relatively easy operation for food, it is, that is a utilization of both blue and white collar, semi absent manager, scalable run with a proven mature brand on a reasonable transaction average. They told me Subway. But the last thing they wanted was Subway. What they're looking for are the characteristics that I just defined. Okay? And every once in a while, somebody will come with me with, I got to have this. And son of a gun, when we go through the process, guess what? They were right. And when they're right, and when that type of business is geographically available, oh, that's fun. Go ahead.
Thank you, Stephen. That really helped a lot. So
Thank you.
if anybody else have any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat box or just ask. Okay, we have a question from Chadrick.
Okay, so yeah, can you read that question? I'm sorry.
It says, I'm looking at the Scooters Coffee franchise, but the net worth requirements is 500K. Do you think it's possible to attain franchising to cover startup costs when my network is 100,000?
Okay. My answer to that is, first of all, I don't represent the franchise. Second, I'm not familiar with that franchise. Now, if it's my understanding, if their minimum net worth criteria is 500K, and if the candidate's net worth is only 100K, by definition, they would not meet the minimum criteria, even if they were able to get X amount of loan. Say in this example, you got a $400,000 loan, which is an asset, but that's offset because that's a liability on the books. So in the example that the candidate just gave, in my professional opinion, they would not meet the minimum criteria. Looks like there's another question.
Yes,
Elvis?
we have a question from Howard Logan. He says,
Sure.
I don't have much money in savings. What's the cheapest franchise is there to buy?
That's an outstanding question. The most basic question that I ask somebody in the 4 quadrants of franchising, do you want the customer to come to you, i.e. retail brick and mortar, Starbucks, McDonald's, or do you want to go to the customer? And if so, do you want to go to their home and our place of business service? Now, many of the service concepts that I represent, you can get into for under 100K. I think the lowest ones start at about the 50K range. And typically the franchisor is going to want you, and the lender is going to want you to have skin in the game. So as a general rule of thumb, 25 to 30% is your cash injection minus maybe whatever third party or whatever other funding mechanism you might have. So with respect to service-based concepts, because they're home-based or light industrial suite-based, you might not have the cost infrastructure that you would have in a retail business. Lease cost, where you're potentially going to have inventory. So, the majority of our retail concepts, many of them, if you've got 250K, you can get into some pretty neat experiences. I think on the lower end of retail is about the 150 to 175 space. And that would include working capital defined by the franchisor. So to answer your question, if someone is cash constrained and net worth and liquidity restrained, it's going to be most likely easier for them to get in on a service-based franchise. That's a very good question. Elvis, any others?
I have nothing else on YouTube, and I guess this is it. So I just want to say thank you so much, Stefan, for doing this presentation. We appreciate you being here with us. And for the audience watching there, I'm going to be sending this PowerPoint slide to you with the recording link as well. So thank you all very much for being here. And Stefan, thank you so much as well.
And thank you to our vets for what they do for the country. Thank you, guys. God bless you.
Awesome.